Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
For this effort. I'll try not to cry because it's the last panel. I just, yay, crying. As the community program chair, I would love to say that you can tell me what a great job I have done putting together this conference, but I just want to say that I am standing here to represent hundreds of volunteers who have put their effort into this. So my only currency that I have to bring to this is appreciation. And so I want to express to you all my heartfelt appreciation for our speakers who volunteered their creativity and their intellect and their souls and their time, and that has been so great. I really want to thank the university for their contribution, and although one might say this is their job, I know that all of the university folks who have been contributing to this have been putting in above and beyond what would be required of a job, and so they also are our volunteers in many ways. The program is put together by many committees of volunteers from the community and students, and all of you are welcome, if you're not a part of that, to be a part of that and have your contributions reflected in the program. Housers, there's so many ways to just thank you all for all of what you did to make this happen. And I just want to say, I think of CWA as magic. That's why I am doing this job. There are not very many conferences that I have ever been to in my professional career where the speakers have said, this brought me joy, or this conference is magic. This one is really unique, and I really appreciate that. For you guys. I would love to say I have all sorts of prepared comments, but of course this is CWA, and so I'm kind of up here winging it. So we have a process that we use to get to our programming, and then we have a few traditions, and one of them is that we pay a little bit of tribute to longtime CWA participant Molly Ivins. And yay, for those of you who remember. So Molly was a brilliant journalist, pundit, who used her pen to speak truth to power. And she was just such a wonderful contributor to CWA. Her mantra was, raise hell, work hard, and have fun. And I think that is such a great mantra for all of CWA, because that is really what we do. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Jon to turn on our final panel in homage to Molly.
Thank you, Yvette, and welcome everyone. My name is Jon Leslie. I am going to start with some prescribed commentary. For recording purposes, today is Thursday, April 10th, 2025. It is 3:30 p.m., and this is panel number 18191, titled CWA 2025 Closing Panel, Satire as Resistance. Before we get started, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. One other thing I'd like to mention, you've probably heard this a few times, is we want to be sure you get a chance to ask questions. Here's how we'll handle the Q&A. We'll reserve the end of the discussion for that Q&A, and we're using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. At any time in the session, just raise your hand, and you can request a note card and a pencil from one of our producers who are stationed around the room. Please write legibly. And when you're done with your card, just raise your hand and we'll come pick it up and bring it back to the front. If you're a student, please indicate that by writing student on your question, and we'll prioritize those student questions in the Q&A. And I urge your questions to be brief and to the point, and if I get lots of similar questions, I would try to group them so that we can cover as much territory as possible. All right, now I'd like to introduce this Ferrari of a panel. And I did one other session this week, and I used AI to do the speaker bios, and it inadvertently did a little satire because they were not accurate. So I thought, well, I didn't think. Some of our students, Charlotte and Jordan, were like, you should do it again. And I thought, why not? So with
at our expense.
Thank you for your patience. But with exaggeration in mind, I'd like to introduce Lisa Graves. Lisa Graves is the unrivaled titan of the legal world.
Oh, I mean, really? Is this inaccurate? I don't know.
Whose groundbreaking work has single-handedly rewritten the U.S. Constitution.
Unfortunately not.
Dominated every major news network. Oh. And whose mere presence in a courtroom guarantees justice will be served.
Wow. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Jon Heffernan is the ultimate global superhero, whose unparalleled expertise in human rights and democracy has single-handedly eradicated injustice across 5 continents. Jon is the first person called upon to save the world in any crisis. Which brings me to Kate Schatz, the revolutionary literary genius whose books have sparked global movements, transformed societal norms, and whose teachings on race, gender, and social justice have made her the most influential voice of our generation. Kate is adored by millions and is featured on every major media outlet.
Every single one.
Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
I need to share that bio with my kids.
I will email it to you.
Yeah, this is the one panel that my son didn't come with.
Well, we have a live stream recording, so we can have some fun with that. Just in preparing to get the conversation going, I wanted to give you all the opportunity to ask each other maybe questions you might want to know. What do you want to learn from each other in the course of this conversation about using humor to resist or be resilient in the face of challenges? Who would like to start that?
Jon, how does humor go over in Hollywood?
How would I know about Hollywood? Yes, I just made a movie. Thank you. That was such a great toss. Thank you very much. So, yes, I made a movie called American Agitators, and it tells the story of the value of grassroots organizing, told through the story of a guy called Fred Ross, who trained people like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and myself a few years later. and he was all about systemic change and desegregating schools in Orange County, California, working in the 30s, 40s against fascism, Nazism, McCarthyism, and creating change. So it's an inspiring film. His son came to me right after January 6th and said, "Now's the time to make a movie about my dad." And so it is been released. It just won the best documentary in San Jose, California, where Kate hails from, at the Cinequest Film Festival. So I urge you all to see it. What was the question? Hollywood. So no, I'm not from Hollywood. Can I go on and say
Yes,
that I'm
please,
not
please,
from
yes,
Hollywood?
do.
So anyways, it is such a pleasure to be here and to be in a position to commemorate Molly Ivins. I remember her columns. I remember seeing her on TV. And in fact, a friend of mine wrote a play about her called The Red Hot Patriot, the kick-ass wit of Molly Ivins. How cool is that? And I looked her up, and there was a great quote, and I think it's not really funny, but it just is so timely with what we're dealing with right now in our country and our world. And she said, "Politics is not a picture on the wall or a TV sitcom that you can decide you don't much care for. Politics is not about the people in Washington, those people at your state capitol. This country is run by us. It's our deal. We're the board of directors. We own it. They're just not the people we have hired to drive. They're just the people we have hired to drive the bus for a little while." I like that. So, should I go on?
Yeah, please.
So I've worked in war zones for a good portion of my career. I ran programs for the International Rescue Committee in places like Sudan, working with Eritreans and Ethiopians that had fled the war and famine there. I then went on to work in Bosnia and run what was at that time the largest humanitarian assistance program in the history since World War II. Hundreds of thousands of people died, 250,000 more or less. It was an ethnic conflict. Many of you probably remember, some of you don't. But in all those instances, I always tried to look for humor. And in situations that weren't very funny. I was the director of the genocide prevention at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and I even found some humor in that, because if you don't find humor in that, then how can you continue with your job? I wanted to give you one example. In the former Yugoslavia, we received, everybody was pouring money in because nobody knew how to end the conflict, so why don't we just pour money in it? At one point I felt like, are we perpetuating the conflict by being here? So I got out, but before I did, we received a significant grant from USAID. Do you remember that organization? And I think if our Doge bros were around then, we would have never gotten that money. But it was meant to help build a civil society in the former Yugoslavia, which was unknown. And one of the projects that we supported was the Monty Python group of Sarajevo. How cool is that, right? In the middle of the war, and Sarajevo, as many of you probably remember, was under siege. You couldn't get people out. You couldn't come in and out. And we had big programs bringing gas and water into Sarajevo because it was under siege, and there were snipers that circled the entire city. But we were able to get this Monty Python group out, Monty Python-esque group out to Zagreb, which is where I was based, and they performed. And they brought together Serbs and Bosnians and Croats, and they laughed. And it was just such a moment of joy that you didn't see in this war, because there was nothing joyous about it. But the fact, through comedy and through satire, they could bring these factions who were killing each other together was key, and I'll always remember that, how important humor and satire was in that context.
Lisa, I have a question for you. I know that you've done a lot of research and work around Project 2025. What's the funniest part of Project 2025? Is there anything that just make you like, where you just can't, you just have to laugh at it?
Wow, that is the hardest question I've ever received. So in November of 2023, I began a project to drag Project 2025 into the sunlight. It was just after the Heritage Foundation had issued it, and I'd seen it before when I was at the Justice Department in 2001 for the orderly transition in government, when guys like Ted Cruz and others came in for the Bush administration with the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for what they wanted to dismantle back then in 2001. But this thing was like that on steroids. It was more than 900 pages. It was really elaborate in terms of its prescriptions, despite the deceptive claims of Donald Trump that he had nothing to do with it. In fact, he had gone to the Heritage Foundation, flown in the private jet with the leader of the Heritage Foundation, spoke at an event with a heritage placard behind him saying, they're going to fill in the details. And then obviously on the campaign he said, what? I had no idea. I'd never seen a thing like this. And then now we're seeing substantial parts of it being implemented in these past 75 days. There are a lot of really terrible and outrageous things in there, and I've written about some of them, and if you want to know more, I'll tell you. But the thing that I suppose surprised me the most was that there's in the chapter on Health and Human Services, and they have all these prescriptions. They want to re-invoke the Comstock Act to bar the mailing of the abortion pill. They want to change this and that. And then they have this line where they talk about how they want to ban in vitro fertilization where you use an egg and a sperm and maybe a different sperm or a different egg to deal with a genetic anomaly. And they say that is because the Bible commands that a person can only have a mother and father as a parent. And so they basically are trying to regulate the in vitro fertilization process to address issues in terms of trying people who want to have children, and they're importing in a biblical idea that in vitro fertilization you can't have two moms. Just can't have two moms. So that was for very interventionist. Of course, then Trump, when he was confronted with some of these anti-in vitro fertilization things, gave this speech I think it was actually during the debate, where he said that he was the great fertilizer or something.
Yeah, I remember that. Because he loves women.
I love women.
I took fertilizer in a different sense. So, anyway.
That's it's like he's self-satired.
Yes, yes. But I'm going to go to Kate and ask you if you could share as a mom, as a parent, as an activist, something that inspires you or that's funny or satirical from your vantage point.
Oh, I really appreciate this whole panel and this premise, because I think that I'm someone who's always really liked to laugh and has made a lot of jokes and has gotten up and just speak about very serious issues, and has made jokes, and I think I've often felt like that was not okay or it was inappropriate, so I do laugh at a lot of it, and I think the reason I'm on this panel is not, again, because I'm just such a funny person, but I did co-author a book with an actual comedian, with W. Kamau Bell, and the book is called Do the Work, and it's, as far as we know, the world's only anti-racist activity book for adults. And it's a book that, that we basically tried to find a way to make talking about white supremacy and race and racism, and specifically what white people need to do better. And we tried to make that funny. And so, it was a really good experience to work with I just think I'm funny. I actually got to work with someone who is an actual stand-up comedian by trade. And we were able to really go there in a lot of places. We were writing it in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We always like to tell people we had a deadline for our manuscript on January 6th. We didn't meet that deadline. We had to email our editor and say, we're watching some things unfold that might need to go in the book.
Another chapter.
Hilarious. But I think I'm glad you brought up. I'm not glad you brought up the Comstock Act. I'm not glad that that's in the Project 2025, but I think one of my favorite quotes about the role of humor and laughter and joy in change making, of course, comes from the revolutionary Emma Goldman, who famously said that if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. And as the story goes, and she wrote about it in her memoir, that she was dancing at a party and she was scolded by someone else in the movement for having fun. And that was her response, was no way, and she is someone who was famously jailed for violating the Comstock Act because she was writing about and distributing contraceptives in New York City in the Lower East Side in the 19th century. So that's hilarious. It's all hilarious. We have to laugh. And I think when I first was told about this particular panel, the first thing that came to my mind, I have a memory, and this is like a core memory for me as an activist, as an undergrad, as in my freshman year, I went to UC Santa Cruz, and I mean, picture a teenager in the 90s who's passionate about social justice and goes to UC Santa Cruz. Like, that was me. I was ready to, smash the system and change the world, and I went to my first protest, and I believe it was around freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal, a political prisoner who's still in prison, right? We're having a walkout, and we're trying to get people to walk out of class, and there was this older woman who was an activist, an older student, and she, white girl with dreads, and she was so intense and fierce, and I really looked up to her, and we were marching through campus, and there was two women in a car who were talking to each other and laughing, and this woman ran up to their car and smashed her fist on the hood of the car and yelled, "It's good to laugh, but it's also good to free political prisoners." And I was like, oh, that's too much. That's not how I want to approach it. It's like, and I kind of backed away, and I joined like a different group of people that day. But that's always stuck in my head is, that might work for her, and I think that does work for someone, but that's not going to be my way in to situations of change making, because it actually just is. Both things are good, but I'm not going to yell at anybody for laughing.
All right. We have one question in so far. I think another one is coming, but I wanted to do a little bit of just grounding Molly Ivins. And the question that came in is about Molly. So, I have a quote from Molly about the two kinds of humor. One kind makes us chuckle about our foibles and our shared humanity, kind of like, if you know the reference, what Garrison Keillor does. The other kind holds people up to public contempt and ridicule. That's what I do. Satire is traditionally the weapon of the powerless against the powerful. I only aim at the powerful. When satire is aimed at the powerless, it is not only cruel,
Yes.
it's vulgar. End quote. The question, what would Molly Ivins ask of us now, and how are we doing? Please discuss.
Please discuss.
I mean, I think she'd be endorsing this panel.
Yeah,
But if she were here, she would be here, obviously. Yeah. She's one of my heroes. I just loved how she spoke truth to power, and with such wit and brilliance. So I think, I think she would be expecting us to have a lot more fun satirizing these, in my opinion, buffoons. That's a controversial opinion, right? I think that, so I was thinking about this panel, and I don't think I'm allowed to curse, but you know how they
If
say.
you do, I will.
I will too. I've been waiting all week.
Well, am I allowed to curse?
I mean, this is a free expression zone. Yeah.
I mean,
We've had some cursing in other panels.
Right.
I can vouch for that. But do as you will.
Well, you know how it's sort of vogue for the right to say to people, "Fuck your pronouns." I was thinking, why are we calling it Doge? Fuck his pronouns. It's dodgy.
I really agree, and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think I was on a panel recently, and I think what I think Molly Ivins would ask of us is, and similarly, to be more creative, and that's in our resistance, in our humor, in our responses, more creativity, more. And I was in a talk recently at a graduate school at UC Berkeley, and people were asking about attacks on DEI. And so I was like, look, why don't we just start calling it something else? Like, come on, we're creative. Like, the Department of Educational Interest, and how can we start coming up with like these, they're so concerned with these acronyms. We'll make it stand for something else. Like, how do we get creative? And, certainly I was out at the protests last Saturday in Oakland. There were protests around the country, but I saw so many good signs. So many good signs, right? Good signs. And like that, I felt like I wanted to see that creativity and that level of humor and outside of just that day, like seeing thousands of people with their very, very clever signs, the Third Reich, right? Great, I can't even remember all the great ones, but I wanted to see them not just on this one day. I want to see them wheat pasted to sides of buildings. I want to see them spray painted. I'm not opposed to graffiti when it's used for political strategy. I want to see it on T-shirts and on signs. I want to see more of that. So I think more creativity, more grassroots, more people. I've been really moved, I will say, by the growing protests outside of Tesla dealerships. In many of the cities where they've been happening, it started with one person showing up. I was just talking to someone the other day who works across the street from one, and it said, a few weeks ago it was one guy with a sign, and then the next week there was 5 people with a sign, and now there's hundreds of people showing up every week. So one, creativity, and 2, maybe in the spirit of Molly Ivins, the willingness to just go there and be bold and to maybe be the only one, right? Maybe be the only one out there holding the sign and not being afraid in that respect.
So... just to play on the Tesla thing, so my daughter who lives in San Francisco was walking her enormous Mamera sheepdog. Has anybody ever seen? They're just a massive dog, and her dog's name is Frida. And Frida decided to take a dump right under the tire of a Tesla. And she sends this picture to my wife and I and her sisters and says, "What should I do?" Now, I think I was recently at a it was referred to as a teach-in at Politics and Prose. I don't know how many people have been there in DC. It's a wonderful independent bookstore, and people like Jamie Raskin was there, and David Colt, a former ACLU professor at Georgetown, and Skye Perryman, who is with Democracy War, who's really leading the cause in terms of the litigation against, and sometimes winning against the administration. And somebody asked the question of Raskin, when it came time for Q&A, said, so, what should we do? And his first thing that he said was self-care. Because he said, this is going to be a long haul. These are dark times. And I think that humor plays such an enormous role in it. For me, it's I can't stay up past 11:30 anymore, but it's taking advantage of all those late night shows. There is so much fodder out there, and I think Molly Ivins would say, if you don't take advantage of that fodder, then we're really screwing up.
All right, thank you. We're going to come back to late night shows because we do have a question on that topic, but we're going to get some student questions in first. From a student, how do you balance humor with remaining respectful of the issue you are addressing or the people who might disagree or be indifferent?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not a prop comic, but I did bring a prop.
I thought maybe you were car shopping.
Yes. Yes. So there's a right-wing group that's now litigating a case before the Supreme Court. It's called Consumer Research. It was really like a zombie group. It died over a decade ago and then was resurrected by this billionaire named Barry Seid, who you may have heard gave Leonard Leo more than $1 billion, the guy who packed the Supreme Court, in order to advance his agenda to regress our laws. Consumers Research sort of gets away in a way with its name because it's confused with Consumer Reports. Now, Consumer Reports, you may subscribe because I subscribe, obviously, because I want to know what's happening. And this write-up in Consumer, which is one of the straightest, non-political, straight-up, amazing, information for buying things. Its write-up of the Tesla Cybertruck warrants a public reading. By Consumer Reports. The Cybertruck features a polarizing angular design and paintless, I thought it said pointless the first time. Paintless alloy body panels. It has an estimated range of 325 miles. The controls are highly distracting, partly because the turn signals, wipers, and high beams are controlled by buttons on a tiny squarish steering wheel. Who wants that kind of car? A tiny squarish steering wheel, and where steering wheel adjustments are done through the screen. The truck is very quick and relatively nimble, but the steering is non-linear. That's what I want in a car. I want
Non-linear steering.
Non-linear steering. The steering is non-linear. And can be unpredictable. I'm also for that. The truck is, okay. The ride is firm yet composed. Outward visibility is atrocious, which makes it difficult to park, probably, and to see other people. They just said the park part. But the backup camera feed in the center screen helps offset it a little. Tiny red LEDs at the base of the windshield pillars form a token BSW system. I think this is a respectful write-up of a really terrible vehicle created by a really terrible person.
To go back to your question, Lisa, that you asked about like things that I find funny as a parent, also, and my kids think Cybertrucks are so ugly and funny, and I love it. They point them out and laugh at them, and I love that. I think this is such a great question, and I will say, in writing Do the Work with Kamau, we were constantly thinking of how we toe the line of humor and being serious. And we weren't even towing it. We were kind of like consistently hopping back and forth over it. And I think one way that we tried to do that, one is just kind of balance. So in our book, we were really trying to think like, if we've got a page that's really jokey, like, where we're really kind of messing around and making a lot of jokes, we made sure that, on the next page, you're hit with like, okay, boom, like something pretty real. Our tagline for the book, unofficial, because it involves a swear word, is that we wanted the book to be funny but not effing around. That's our unofficial tagline. Because, so we were constantly trying to balance, how do we be fun, how do we, we kind of bring people in and making jokes about systemic racism, not funny, and then how do we land that by making sure that we're grounding it and the severity of that. And to the point about, the target of the jokes, and again, I learned so much from working with Kamau, an actual comedian, but he's very committed to never punching down, which is, to go back to this idea of what Molly Ivins said about the powerful. He never punches down in his comedy, and so you're never, the target. So I think it's about who's the target of your joke, right? And I think I will just say, like, this is where Chappelle goes so wrong, and his obsession with talking about trans people. That is a great classic example of irresponsible punching down. Like, you're already so funny, dude. Like, why are you going to keep doing that? And I think, so keeping that in mind when you're making those jokes, is there a butt of the joke? Am I directing it at someone, and is it punching down or is it punching up?
Thanks for that.
I think I'm not a comedian, obviously, but I think that sort of knowing your audience is important, but also, having certain people in your life that you can try it out with, and people in varying degrees. So I have 3 daughters in their 20s, which typically they cancel me at least once or twice a day. But hearing from them, and at the same time, trying something out with my 95-year-old mother. So I think, but it can go flat, and it's happened to me. When I tried to make those genocide jokes at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and it always wasn't a hit. I wonder why. But yeah, I think, and it depends on all. I guess it's difficult if you're writing a book, right? Because you don't know who your audience is. But if it's something, in a small group or something like that, it's a real balancing act, because you can really go terribly, terribly wrong.
Well, thank you all for those answers. I have 2 student questions that I'm going to combine into one overall. This one starts with a student from International Affairs. It is often seen as though I see horrible images and depressing news and facts I'll never forget for the rest of my life. It is almost impossible to look at politics in an optimistic or humorous way. When looking at U.S. or international politics, how do you use satire or ways you use satire in your lives? And by extension, second question, humor is naturally a coping mechanism for shock. How can we use humor to bridge divides and make change? Thank you for these questions.
Yeah. You want to start with that?
No, you
seen
start.
You've seen some stuff. I mean, I think those are such good questions and points. And I think that when we, again, when we're using humor, it does not necessarily mean that we're laughing at something, right? I think, again, so much of human atrocity is, I think, it's so absurd. Like, it's so unbelievable what humans can do to each other, right? And again, there's also such a long tradition of satire and humor as resistance. And I think that has actually felt helpful to me as someone who has also, again, grappled, like, it is good to laugh. It's also good to free political prisoners. Like, both matter. But really understanding that there is, again, through the centuries in so many different cultures, there are such a long tradition of using humor to get through those incredibly difficult times. And so that kind of helps ground me, is realizing, like, this isn't, there's ways to do it that are not disrespectful or that are not diminishing or making light of anything, but acknowledging, again, the absurdity and kind of poking through, like Emperor's New Clothes, like poking through the absurdity of it all.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I just think that's a great word, absurdity, and usually you can find some type of humor in absurdity. But I think it's all about timing too, right? I mean, because everybody's in a different situation, and being able to kind of figure out what works and doesn't work, and oftentimes it doesn't work, and to be able to be cognizant of that, I think is very important.
I would also just add really quickly too, it's also really about who's making the jokes. Right? And I think, to me, some of the best kind of comedy and satire has come from, especially when we're talking about oppressed groups or groups that have experienced violence, it's coming from that group, right? Again, who's making, I love listening, this great tradition of, like, gay, queer comics making jokes about being gay, right? That's funny to me because I'm gay. I can laugh at that, right? Again, Kamau is part of a long tradition of Black comics, from Richard Pryor on through, who talked about race and used humor to get up in front of people and get through some really, really, really painful stuff. Again, there's long traditions of that. And so I think, too, when you're thinking about humor, like, maybe who to listen to, like, ooh, is it problematic that I'm laughing at that guy? Thinking about, again, who the person is delivering the jokes, I think that can help.
I'll just add a couple things. So one is, I think that it's important to think about what is your media diet. What are you consuming? For myself, I don't watch horror films because I just don't need that kicking around in my subconscious then to make its way into my nightmares.
But they can be really funny.
I do wake up thinking about the people that I research, so I'm not able to really separate work in that way from my dreams. But I think, there are times in which the pictures of violence that we have to bear witness to at some point can become almost pornographic in the depravity of it. And so it's a question of, like, okay, I've seen this, what can I do about it? What am I going to do? And I think that those images, which are important images for the people to recognize what's happening in the world in different ways, it's then, does that image stop you from action? Does it freeze you? Or can you take that knowledge and use it to build for change? Can you take positive action in response to this to try to make that not happen again or prevent that from happening? I was talking with Oakthorn, who I'm sure many of you know, this afternoon, and he was telling me about a satire group in South Africa during apartheid called Wait a Minute. And it was a group of singers who were satirizing apartheid, who were trying to, like, break through humor. And I think humor really does have the potential for breakthrough. And I know that these tales, I'm going to just say quickly, one of them The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin, that was made in the midst of not so great dictators, real deal awful dictators. It was a brave, film to make at that time, and he made it then. And so I think there's a lot of call for art to respond to the absurdity, to the outrageous acts, and to show people who are exerting enormous power to be the fools that they are, to be the self-absorbed, conceited, terrible people that they are. Subsequently, years later, Mel Brooks wrote The Producers, and that Broadway show and the film and the musical and the Springtime for Hitler, I mean, wow. That satire of Hitler, I don't wish he were alive, but I wish that he could have seen that, because it's just so potently humiliating of him, and rightly so. And then this is not a comedy and not quite a horror movie, but the Inglourious Bastards, reimagining history in a way to show a victory over a demonic figure. And so I think there's a lot that satire can really do to respond to the deeply destructive, violent, inhumane, torturous things that we are witness to in this day and age.
All right, thank you.
I was just thinking, Hitler, our current president, and others, so much fodder over history, I think, has been given to those figures who don't see humor in themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And it, it's. Anyways, I was just thinking that. Isn't that true? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of humor, which was what we're doing.
Go on.
Another student question, but I'm combining it with a community member question, and we've talked a little bit about a few comedians, and I think we've touched on these, but I would love to revisit. Our comedians play a vital role in change making, and if so, are contemporary comedians properly inhabiting this role? And what late night comedians do you like? Who do you feel they are politically impactful? And are there any funny Republicans?
Oh yeah, Republicans are hilarious. Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I like Johnny Carson. No, contemporary. Jon Stewart is always going to be my favorite. And I don't know why. I mean, but I just think he's brilliant, and I think he just really makes you think. And I think he also has not that other comedians don't, but you see his line of thought leads to a conscious too, which I think appeals to me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love comedy. I'm friends with a lot of comedians. I love watching them, and are they doing enough? Some are. Yeah, some aren't. I mean, that's not, they don't all share the same values, and they're not all doing comedy for the same reason. I mean, I'm drawn to comics who are very intentionally kind of getting up there to speak truth to power and to make a bunch of jokes, but they're also not shying away. Like, I love Hassan Minhaj. I love Hari Kondabolu. Again, I love my good buddy Kamau Bell. I really like Samantha Bee. I wish she was on TV more. I love John Oliver. I think John Oliver does a bang-up job. And, I'm someone, I watch Saturday Night Live still because my kids love it. And to me, SNL is an example of, I think they're obeying in advance way too much. I think that's a place where I wish SNL was going harder. I'm disappointed in a lot of it, and I think they could be doing so much more. I think there's been a lot of smart writers there, but I would like to see a lot more from them.
Yeah, I think Colbert is hilarious. I really do enjoy it. Some days I can't watch just because it's all a little too raw for me, but when I do, I always feel a sense of relief. John Oliver, Last Week Tonight, is just a fantastic show. He did start out this season with a show based on a story that I helped research and pitch about Clarence Thomas and the RV. And so special place in my heart for Oliver on that. Didn't work with him. They did that. Their whole team is so, they do not, take pitches, but they were so intrigued by the story that ProPublica wrote and won a Pulitzer Prize for their amazing shoe leather investigation. It was phenomenal. When I found the, I'm not calling it a mockumentary, the vanity biopic that Clarence Thomas had made with the funding of billionaires like Harlan Crow. That biopic had this line where Clarence Thomas is saying, I'm just a man of the people, and I love my RV, and I love my RV so much that I love parking in the parking lot of Walmart more than going to beaches. Meanwhile, one of the billionaires underwriting the film about his common roots were flying him around the world on private jets, luxury private jets, and mega yachts to New Zealand, as ProPublica uncovered, and Greece. Shipping the yacht to Greece, because he's a man of the people, and then I find humor in other ways, but I definitely agree on Samantha Bee. I agree on the Daily Show and the variety of people who are on the Daily Show. So Jon Stewart, but also the broader set, and so I do think that there's a lot of great humor that really can provide relief from the daily reality that we're facing.
And I also want to be sure to shout out the comic and the writer Amber Ruffin. And Amber Ruffin is who was just uninvited from hosting the White House Correspondents' Dinner because she's dangerous, right? I mean, I think that actually is a great example of how dangerous comedy can feel in this moment, right? She's a black woman who is going to get up and tell jokes, so she was uninvited.
I'm surprised that they're still having the dinner.
I know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so y'all are doing a great job on the questions. I am going to combine a few, and we have student questions. How difficult is it for you all to make jokes about issues and events that you support? And is there ever a danger of taking satire, name-calling, etc. too far, escalating beyond political disagreement?
Well, I'm going to give that a try. So, I know I'm picking on Elon Musk because in Molly Ivins, punch up plan, people talk about him as a genius. So this could cross the line, but I'm just going to say they talk about him as a genius. But let me just tell you, as someone who, for a brief period, had a Starlink system. I don't know if anyone out here have a Starlink system. Okay, yeah. So it comes to your house and it's a square. It's about this size, and it has these two concentric circles on it on the front. And
tell people what it is.
So Starlink is a way, if you live in a rural area, for you to get internet, but I don't recommend it. So this box comes. It's sort of like your cable box when you have internet in your house. These two circles have no meaning. They're his ambition for Mars. So he has designed a box for you to plug in your internet to. It has no light to tell you whether the internet is on or off. It has this entire front face. It is entirely these two circles. It doesn't have a light on the bottom. So you don't, if your internet goes out, you're like, what do I do? And then if you want to reset it when your internet goes out, which happens from time to time, you, and most people in this room will know this, when you, phones before cell phones, the phone in your house, it had this little thing, a clip. You had to squeeze that little clip and push it into the edge of your phone or into the wall. It has a little clip. And the manual says, jam this in 7 to 8 times to reset your internet. I mean, he personally approved this design. I don't trust him with Social Security. I wouldn't trust him with a fucking bike. And I don't think that's going too far, but it may offend Elon Musk. And you know what? I don't care.
Or with a chainsaw, right? That was the most uncool thing I've ever seen.
Every time you pick up the mic on the stand, I think you're going to drop it after one of these comments. Anyone want to follow that amazing answer?
I think I just forgot what the question was. I was so distracted by the Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Does it travel the line to offense?
Yeah. I mean, so here's what I wanted to say. In terms of the danger of kind of making jokes, right? I want to be very, I would not have written a book, a humorous take on white supremacy, without a Black co-author, collaborator, who is a very good friend of mine, with whom I have a lot of trust. Like, a big part of our process in the book is that we are good friends and we have built trust, and that we can talk to each other, because throughout the book there's a dialogue between us. It's kind of a written dialogue of us kind of talking back and forth about his experiences as a Black man, mine as a white woman, and sometimes we're making jokes and sometimes we're really serious, and that's kind of the glue for the book. And that partnership and that trust, created the space where it felt safe for us to be making jokes that I otherwise would not be making. Right? I'm very conscious of my audience, but I also still am very interested in using humor again to talk about race, sometimes in self-deprecating ways of myself as a white person, can kind of break the ice in some situations that way. So it's about being strategic, and knowing when and how to kind of make the jokes, what trust you have with the other people in the space, and how to navigate that. I also think it's important too, because I did talk about being self-deprecating and using humor in that way, but not to do that too much. And I do actually really think that women do. I think that that's a tendency that women have, is to really self-deprecate. And sometimes we do it in a humorous, satirical way, or like, oh, I'm a woman, I'm just an idiot, I can't drive, ha ha ha. And like right, that can be funny if we're playing on those stereotypes, but there's also a way in which if we do it too much, we're just kind of reinforcing those ridiculous stereotypes, and sometimes some internalized misogyny that we have. So I always feel cautious of that as well.
Yeah, I feel like that too as an old white guy. No, I think that you need to be respectful, but you also have to recognize that not everybody's going to agree with you. You can't please everybody, and because then I think if you try to do that, then that edge. And again, you're speaking to somebody who really knows nothing about comedy, but I think that edge is important for you to be funny to others, but not everybody is going to think the same way.
Yeah, and I actually meant to answer the question of, is there a Republican I find funny who's a comedian? And I'm going to date myself by saying, you might be a redneck.
Oh, Jeff Foxworthy.
Yes. Yeah.
He was funny.
Yeah.
All right.
How did I miss that one? Who's Jeff Foxworthy?
Oh, God. You might be a red. We actually riffed on that in our book. We have you might be an anti-racist if.
You might be.
I want to just quickly add, though, because I think this is really, really important, and I write about this a lot in the book, is I think equally important as making the jokes is knowing what to do when your joke doesn't land, right? When you mess up, right? Because that is one of the things that holds people back so much from talking and maybe making jokes, or even just talking again about race, about controversial issues, is we are worried about offending each other, about saying the wrong thing. And so understanding how to just own it, like if you get it wrong, if your kids cancel you, right? When, what does it look like to actually understand and to apologize and to repair, and to not just dig in, which is often the case.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Good?
No, good.
Okay.
Good.
We're going to move to the next question. Humor can heal, but can humor be used to get people to hear a message that they would otherwise be resistant to?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, we could say more, but yes.
Yeah. We're going to go a little bit deeper.
Because it's unexpected, right? I mean, you're in a totally different space than you're expecting, and so to hear it from that perspective, makes you open to something that perhaps you wouldn't otherwise be.
Yeah, you might be an anti-racist if. You might be a redneck if. Here's another one. This is a student question. I'm not going to curse, but I'll refer to the curse word differently. Take away the right to say F. You take away.
That was creative. Come on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Call it G.
Thank you for your commentary. That was good. I'm going to do it again. You take away the right to say F the government. See how it worked a little better in the second example? How do you keep out of the depressive aspect? If I'm not laughing, I'd be crying. Like gallows humor. Like, how is that a useful tool when faced with challenging situation?
I've been pondering this because all the conversations we've been having about the Constitution. And then I was like, what is, why we call the president the executive, and it means that the president is supposed to execute the laws, not actually kill them. I really just thought of that this afternoon.
You did that?
But then I looked at, what is the origin of this? It's, from the 1640s. It means that you're capable of performance. But it is the branch of government that carries out the laws. It is also concerned with carrying things into practical effect. And it also had an adjectival sense of being stylish, luxurious, and costly. Costly seems appropriate right now. Anyway, so that was what I just want to share with you on that point. I think it was on that point. I think we have to have a sense of humor. We have to maintain our sense of humor in the midst of this, and we have to use that sense of humor, like the signs, like you were saying, the signs at the hands-off protests. I want to see them everywhere in little versions. I want he caused this at every egg shelf. I want it at the gas station. I want it everywhere. I want chalking. I want to see more T-shirts. There's just so much humor, and then I want to see it's easy to have this rage about some things that are happening, but, having a protest that's like a dance protest or glitter and clowns, not to have it just be angry, angry protest, but actually use humor. And I think there's just so much creativity on campus, so much creativity in our friends and neighbors. And I think that creativity can help us bond with each other and help us break through and help us get through this.
Do you think that by sort of broadening that space and using these creative techniques that you might bring in other people who wouldn't normally be in that protest space?
I think so, because like Kate was saying at the beginning, some people, are gonna, pound that car and say no, get serious now. But a lot of people can't relate to that. That's not their personality. That's not kind of what they feel. That's not where their comfort zone. But they might be comfortable at a protest that involves music. Yeah. Or they might be comfortable not at a march, but at, a sign in their window that's, that shares some information. I just think it does broaden it, because, and my view in general of social movements and the movements for change is, I think of it like a jazz band. Everyone cannot be playing the saxophone. You gotta have the sax, you gotta have someone banging the drums, you've gotta have, a bass. In order for us to succeed in these movements, in this effort for change, different people have to be hitting different notes, playing different instruments. And if we're sort of on the same page, this is why I say jazz versus a marching band, then there's room for riffing, for people to be like, I'm going to take the lead on the glitter protest. But you're not into glitter, that's okay. You do this other thing. And we're all trying to raise awareness and bring some joy to dark times. Yep.
And joy is an act of resistance. I think it always has been, but I think especially right now, queer joy, black joy, right? The communities who are being most targeted, right? To be out in space together, to be joyful, to be laughing, to be either laughing at these fools or just laughing with each other and have it be not even about them. It's really powerful, and it means a lot. And so I think when we think about resistance and what protests and what it means to kind of show up again, these spaces that are celebratory. The night the day that Trump declared himself in charge of the Kennedy Center and all that went down with the Kennedy Center. Kamau, my collaborator, was on a flight to DC to perform that night at the Kennedy Center. And so I was getting all these text messages because I work with his team and everybody's, what's going on? Should he cancel? Everybody's canceling. And he was supposed to have a drag queen open for him. And then she was saying that she didn't want, and people were going to lose jobs. It was this whole thing. And so he got off the plane and he's like, I'm still going to perform. And then he got up there and he's like, hey, everybody, welcome to the last time you're going to see a black person at the Kennedy Center, right? So, and he got up and he killed it. But he also, there was a huge protest, a drag show protest that was a drag dance party outside of the Kennedy Center. And he went outside and he spoke, and they had speakers and they played music and they made it a joyful kind of celebration of resistance. So that is what we need more of.
That's great.
Thanks for that. John?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm going to combine two more. and I hope this works. One of them is a statement, not a question. Charlie Chaplin made everybody laugh without words. Do you think that this administration will silence the comedians or satire in their efforts to take away free speech? Do you see what I did there?
Yes, yes.
Thoughts?
Yes.
No.
We have our first debate. Yeah.
I just think it's too powerful, and I just think there's too much resistance among those people who are willing to use their words, and there may be an attempt to silence, but I part of it, I just got to believe this, but no, I think of all people, because in a sense, I mean, these are people that are already, their entire lives have taken risks, right? I mean, this may be at a different level, but I have to say no.
Oh, and I said yes, but to clarify,
Oh.
I mean yes that they're going to try, but I do not believe that they'll be successful.
okay.
But I 100% think yes, they will be trying to silence that, absolutely. But I really genuinely believe that the people who are currently in charge, I think that there are many things, many things, but what they are not cool at all. They are not cool. And by that, in so many ways, but by that I mean they also do not pay attention to art and culture, and I think that is a space where we can really continue. They don't know what is going on. Their fingers are not.
You don't think that President Trump takeover of the Kennedy Center was a genuine act because he's so focused on culture? That's
No, not at all. No, they don't know. They know nothing about who's actually out there and who's speaking and so I believe that they will definitely try, but like whack-a-mole, there's too many funny people, there's too many artists, there's too many creative people. And I was getting a sandwich with my daughter the other day, and a pop song was playing in the place, and this guy turned to me and he goes, "Oh, it's recession pop. This song came out in 2008. I love recession pop." And I was like, and he looks at my daughter and he's like, "I wonder what's going to come next." And I was like, but it led us to this, this is where punk rock comes from, right? Out of England, out of like Margaret Thatcher's England. Like we get the punk movement, right? We get great art that comes from these times, and that doesn't make it okay. But I think that it's one aspect of culture that you really can't squash. So I want more of it.
Yeah, and I remain hopeful. And if they do try to suppress comedians and others, fighting back in that way, I hope that everyone takes a vow that this is like seeds. So that if they take out one flower, that seeds burst forth, so that it's 10 next time.
Thank you. All right, we have another student question.
Yes, student questions.
The best part about humor is that it draws on the diverse experiences of others. Do you believe cancel culture inhibits the ability of others to share their experiences that vastly differ from other folks?
The cancel culture question.
I think that's in your
The
book, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't totally think that cancel culture is like a real thing. I actually think I think it gets really blown out of proportion.
You haven't met my daughters.
I also think that it comes out of, to some degree, I'm really okay with calling people out when they're being assholes. Like, I have no problem with that, And here's the thing I'd say about this idea of like the danger of cancel culture. I think that when people get concerned about it, it is often in the context of men who are in positions of power who have misstepped and then get canceled, right? Show me the examples of those men who haven't found their way back into positions of power, right? They come back. They go away for a while, and then they come back, and they have sold-out audiences, and they have huge followings. They're fine. So I'm not someone, and I think that the idea that cancel culture is limiting the diversity of what we hear. No, like white supremacy and misogyny are limiting the diversity of what we hear, not cancel culture.
Yeah.
Tepid smattering of applause. Thank you.
I just want to add that, there's this phenomenon of cancel culture, and then there's actual cancel culture, which is, Donald Trump suing ABC News and George Stephanopoulos for saying that, he sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll when the jury verdict was that he was a sexual abuser. And then settling that case, where the judge said, sexual abuse, is equivalent in essence of sexual assault. But, now I created in my personal capacity a hashtag, which is, what would a sexual abuser do? A WWSAD, because I'm like, oh, he would appoint someone to the head of the Pentagon who had, been alleged to have raped a woman with, a roofie. Oh, wait, he'd make sure someone gets on the Supreme Court who is, pushed through despite the fact that there was compelling testimony by Christine Blasey Ford about about Kavanaugh's attempted sexual assault on her, though he denied it. It's not fun. This is triggering. It's not funny to talk about sexual abuse, but you want to talk about cancel culture? Yeah. What's happening right now in America with these assaults on universities, the attacks on law firms, the idea that they're going to take over Columbia University, that is cancel culture. You have a concern about cancel culture? Focus your energy there. That is real.
I have just been informed we are over time, so I would like to thank our panelists, and will you please join me? I could have done this for longer, but thank you all so very much.
Well done. Sorry for the F-bomb. There were only two.
Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs, and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.